Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and ATARC is an organization that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees who are signed in and joining us today, and a special thanks to Allison Lynch and the entire Zimperium team for making today possible. Before we begin, I just want to encourage our audience at home that you can submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform, and then also be sure to answer the poll questions as we go through them to ensure that you receive your CPE credit for attending today's discussion. Now, with that said, I see all of our panelists are on camera. You guys can go ahead and unmute yourself because I'm going to call on you to begin with a round of introductions. So please share with us who you are, what agency or organization you represent, and a little bit about your role there. If we could start with Peter, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for the invite as well, too. I'm Peter Alex. I work for the FBI. I'm responsible for all of our engineering and development efforts under our mobility program office here at the FBI, which pretty much encompasses all the mobile devices, smartphones, wearables, tablets, and so forth. And then as well with that, we get into the MDM, cloud infrastructure, and anything basically securing a device from front end all the way to the back end of mobile devices. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let's jump to Eugene next.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to join the panel. I work for MITRE, which is a nonprofit. We support various government agencies like NIST in providing objective research. And most recently, I worked with the NIST and MITRE team in developing the Mobile Device Security Practice Guide 1822. And I work on other projects, working with in the privacy domain, privacy profiles, and various things. Thanks.
Thank you. And Monique.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monique Vicenti, and I am the Director of Product Marketing for Mobile Endpoint Security at Zimperium.
Fantastic. So I'm going to begin with some of my questions. And like I said, if the audience has questions they want to interject, more than welcome to. We're happy to take those. But to kind of kick things off, Monique, I'd love to start with you on our first discussion question. And then since we only have 3 panelists, it's great because we get to hear from each of you. But Monique, if you could start us off, I want to talk about what are some of the key reasons behind the growing concern for securing mobile devices in today's workplace, especially in the context of hybrid work environments.
Absolutely. Our lives revolve around this little device, from communications with our family to sending emails and conducting business all from one device. There's risk. There's going to be risk that's involved. And according to our annual security report that we release, we identified that 80% of phishing sites now target mobile devices specifically, or are designed to function on both mobile and desktops. So, users are 6 to 10 times more likely to fall for an SMS phishing attack than an email-based attack. And especially in a hybrid work environment where most of the devices are probably going to be managed by the employee. And when they're managed by the employees are the admins. They're the ones who are installing applications now because this is their phone and they're utilizing this for day-to-day operations for work, but they're also using this for their own personal device, checking the news, checking their personal emails, online shopping, checking their bank accounts, so mobile devices just need additional protections that traditional endpoints can't protect.
Yeah, absolutely. And Monique did a great job responding, but Peter or Eugene, would one of you want to weigh in on that a little bit too?
Sure.
I'll jump in if Peter, if I may.
Go
Thanks.
ahead.
Sorry to talk over you.
You're good.
We'll get the hang of it. I'd like to add, Monique is absolutely right. And recent trends kind of support what she's saying. Phishing and ransomware are the biggest threats, according to various resource centers like Identity Theft Resource Center. Another study indicated that 90% of breaches are caused by phishing attacks. That's not just for BYOD situations, but for all breaches. And also 82% of breaches are generally caused by the human element. Now, that human element means that users and employees are contributing to the risk. And so naturally, quite appropriately, organizations are concerned about BYOD and the types of human errors and threats that can be more prevalent with BYOD. I would also say that with COVID and remote work and hybrid work, a lot of organizations were kind of caught flat-footed because BYOD and remote work extends the network perimeter to parts unknown. It's not just the brick and mortar networks with your basic model with a firewall and ingress and egress points, but now you have data going to parts unknown. You have data going to homes and Wi-Fi, home Wi-Fi, coffee shops, anywhere Wi-Fi is present. You could have users and, employees accessing your network, accessing your data. So what's happening to all that information on these various devices? So there's a lot of variability as well. These devices, as Monique indicated, users are managing these devices, the BYODs. And so you don't know exactly what you're dealing with. So you got to try to bring some level of control over these devices through software management processes. And that would also include your back-end processes and what's happening once you enter the perimeter, the ingress point. Are you implicitly allowing everybody to all assets, or are you going with more of a zero trust kind of situation? So there are a lot of considerations, and so the change in our workforce and our habits have really forced everybody to analyze what we're doing with our data and who's accessing everything.
Thank you, Eugene. And Peter, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I think with what Eugene just mentioned as well, I think the key drivers, I mean, ever since the pandemic, I think we're obviously all aware, that just pushed everyone out of nowhere. I mean, it came out of nowhere, and half the people were caught off guard, as Eugene mentioned. And part of that strategy now at this point, everyone's becoming more mobile, and it's sticking that way to a degree across industries, not just ours. So, even as the government side of the house, somewhat our responsibility to help get companies and standards to raise to those higher standards as well too. So now all of a sudden what used to be a federal standard, now it just becomes across the board, just a natural standard to be at those levels now. So it helps stop a lot of the attempts and things that are going on behind the scenes, more of the infrastructure related. As Eugene mentioned again, you got to break it down into the user related stuff that you can protect, but you can put policies around. But then there's also the networking side and the behind the scenes side of it that we as agencies and as companies need to be more responsible for, taking more of a defensive or offensive approach towards getting ahead of those things. So yeah.
Thank you. Anything else on this before I ask my next question?
No, I think the two gentlemen definitely did a great job explaining, why we need to secure mobile endpoints. But I think another highlight in the news that really solidified we need to secure these mobile devices is, these everyday applications, social media applications started being blocked, in the government field on personal devices or on their corporate devices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Now, Peter, I want to start with you this time on my next question, which is just how comprehensive is your approach to mobile device protection? And can you speak a little bit about how has your prioritization been impacted, if it has been, by recently published guidelines?
Sure. So good thing for us. I mean, it's a very comprehensive approach. And we've had this stance for years, actually. We've had, I mean, it was, I don't even know when it was, prior to roughly 2016 timeframe. We've been looking at this from a holistic perspective and trying to get ahead of it, even if technology wasn't quite there yet. We've been going and breaking it down from like the MDM or, EDM, however you want to, the management of the devices, the mobile management of the devices and everything. So we broke it down from exterior, kind of to all the way to the interior portions of it, where you have the actual device, the hardware, can it be tampered with, what we can lock down on the actual device, and then going down to the operating system, breaking down the operating system, firmware, and then getting into the MDM, making sure that everything's managed from the MDM perspective, ensuring that our cloud, even behind the scenes, is secure, making sure all of our ports are blocked, firewalls are blocked. So we've gone after a pretty rigorous approach, and we also have policies around application vetting as well too. So we've had those in place as well. To go to Monique's point, I mean, the apps are where you see a lot of the vulnerabilities showing up more so now, and the user side. So our approach has been very, very comprehensive, but it's taken a long time to get here too as well. This, figuring this stuff out is definitely not easy. And you have to be granular in the way that you look at this, because if you're not, you can end up exploiting or just not missing something that actually opens up a vulnerability elsewhere. Not that we're by any means perfect, and we never will be, but we try to stay ahead of things and keep patches and keep up to date on certain things, making sure that we have all these things in place, softwares and policies together to make sure that no one can infiltrate what we have up front. And then we put it into the hands of our users, and from there, we can take it one step at a time.
Thank you. Eugene, would you like to weigh in next?
Sure. Well, I would say as a nonprofit, MITRE works with various government agencies to develop the guidelines and frameworks and things that organizations can use to get granular, as Peter mentioned, starting with risks, analyzing, really working from a risk management standpoint and breaking everything down, and analyzing where your risks are, your threats, and some of the documents that we've produced are things like 1822, which is the mobile device security BYOD guide, practice guide, which essentially built a lab. It's a project where we built a lab and then analyzed the risks using OWASP and other threat indicators to determine how we would mitigate those risks. And I can tell you that they're pretty intensive, pretty inclusive. So it deals with not only the connections, the network layer, but also all the way through the application layer and the OS stack. So those guides go into great detail, because I think Peter's right. You have to go into detail with your defenses, and Monique can certainly talk about mobile threat defense. There's also things like Enterprise Mobility Manager that it will integrate with MTD, and it'll also integrate with other intelligence services, so you can keep up to date on the various threats. You can look at policies. You can notify a user or administrators when a device is out of compliance, so you can take action to fix those types of things. So you definitely need to be granular, and you do need a comprehensive program in order to stop some of the threats that are out there today.
Yeah, thank you, Eugene. And Monique, I'd love to hear from you next.
Absolutely. One thing we definitely hear in the field is the primary concern is BYOD devices. Employee-owned devices. How can we secure those? How can we identify, which applications they may have, and how can we mark those as, out of compliance? Those are the questions that we get asked the most here at Imperium. And where we definitely help is, we are a mobile threat defense company. We do protect employee devices. We protect on device. Our agent sits on device. It scans a device for risks, compromises, elevated, anything that's elevated as far as behaviors are concerned. But having the granular policy is really a way that enterprises and organizations can really build out, their mobile first security strategy. But in addition to that, taking a look at applications, it's not just, one-sided. You have to take a look at, the device. You have to take a look at phishing attempts. You have to take a look at, network compromises, mobile malware. So those are some of the things, we take a look at, and we ingest as far as threat analytics go. But, at the end of the day, you still have to create those policies to mark things out of compliance.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all. Eugene, kind of circling back to the guidelines, I saw that we had a question come through that you responded in the chat. But if you could start us off, maybe just specific, challenges that are being addressed related to mobile threat defense. If there's any strategies or technologies that are recommended to mitigate mobile threats effectively, could you speak to that just a little bit more for our audience?
Sure. And what I'll do is discuss basically what we did in 1822 for BYOD. 1821 was a previous guide. It dealt with COPE, which was corporate-owned, personally enabled. But there's some similarities between the two documents. And essentially, what we did was we looked at some of the threat indicators, and we took the ones that were most probable, and we attempted to mitigate those within the lab. We actually built a lab that had, a VPN, and then had back-end processes like mobile threat defense. As a matter of fact, Imperium was one of the products we used in the lab for 1822. And we also had things like, well, let me go through the list. We had first a trusted execution environment, which was software that essentially provided separation between personal and business areas or applications and data, which was important not only from a cyber standpoint, but also from a privacy standpoint. BYOD, you have to worry about privacy concerns a little more so than a COPE environment. We also used an enterprise mobility manager, which is basically an agent on the device that provides intelligence back to the back end to monitor policies and configurations. I mentioned the VPN for the connections. We also used an application vetting service. I know you have a question maybe coming up about application vetting, and that basically detects application behavior that would indicate malware. It can be used to analyze all apps or just business apps. So it just depends on how you configure it. And that some of that also, I believe, interfaces over with the mobile threat defense. And of course, mobile threat defense, which is, as Monique indicated, the endpoint protection. It looks at the posture of a device, and as I said, it integrates with EMM, and it looks at device, network, and application kinds of threats. It looks for activities that would indicate that something untoward is happening. And then finally, you can also look at device settings and configurations. There's one thing that's basically on iOS and Android devices, and that is a secure boot situation, which provides some cryptography, so you're booting up into a secure mode, a secure boot that hasn't been infected in any way. And device attestation is another important aspect of iPhone and Android phones. And also there's mobile device API features for certificates and other things like that. And then there's the basic stuff like screen locks and backups and privacy settings. You don't want all your apps accessing all your data, accessing your camera without your permission. So we use those guides to go through all those types of software pieces, modules, and settings. And then basically we provide the what and how we're doing it, but we provide the actual guides for implementation in volume C. So there's A, B, and C. B explains why we're doing what we're doing, and C explains how we did it. So those guides are certainly handy in that regard.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eugene. And you covered it so wonderfully, but Peter or Monique, if you have anything else you'd like to add based on what Eugene just shared, I'd love to hear from either of you as well.
Sure, I can go ahead and jump in. When reviewing the guidelines for managing mobile devices, NIST does a great job at listing the various threats that mobile enterprises can encounter and mapping the countermeasures back to these threats. So utilizing, mobile application vetting, mobile threat defense, mobile application management, like they have this comprehensive table where they do list out the threats and the countermeasures listed. So that was an easy and great way of explaining, all of the different countermeasures.
Yeah, thank you. And Peter, anything to add?
I'll piggyback a little bit off of what Eugene had mentioned, just kind of more on the operational life side of things. I mean, we rely on these guidelines from people and like Eugene and the stuff that they're working on with NIST. I mean, that's the backbone of everything that we do in a lot of senses. So we'll work with NIST, we work with DISA for the DISA STIGs as well too. And we work with NIAP as well for the actual hardening and for the actual device side of the house as well too. So those are 3 different standards groups that we look at, based on a whole approach from our whole mobile ecosystem. Because as Eugene mentioned, even like in the boot up phase of it, you want to make sure that you have a device that's not tampered with when it's booting up as well too. There's just the microcosms of this ecosystem. There's so much to it that we rely on heavily, and my team's only so big, so we can only do so much. We have to rely on the people like Eugene's and the other industry experts out there to put together these guidelines, and we can help piggyback off of it instead of us trying to guess and try to get ahead of things. It's great to have all these guidelines ahead of us. So and for the people that are listening in on it, it's not just us. There's a whole broader world to that this helps benefit at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I am going to go ahead and call for our first poll question. We haven't done one yet. So again, for our audience at home, it's up on the screen, and this is how you get your CPE credit for attending today's event. So be sure to respond to it. But the poll question is, what is the current state of your organization's cybersecurity infrastructure for protecting mobile devices? So relevant to this discussion. And for our panelists, we have a few audience questions that have come through. If you've had a chance to look at those and identify if there's any that you may want to respond to. Renee asks, where are the key pain points that IT admins are identifying as hindrances in establishing the optimal configuration security feature balance with seamless end user experience? So that's a good question, Renee. If any of our panelists have an idea on that, Peter, would you like to take that one?
Let me look at this again.
Sure, yeah, take your time.
So this one's a very delicate balance, because when you really get down to these things and you start implementing a lot of these guidelines and strategies and everything like that, the crux of all of our jobs at the end of the day, when you're the one kind of at the middle road, is what's the balance of security, legal stuff, and user experience at the end of the day? Where are you going to break your balance to make sure that you give the user experience? Because I mean, we can inflate our devices and bog them down with all this special software, and it's going to be the most secure phone you've ever seen in this case, and it doesn't work because the battery's dead in 30 minutes. So this is a huge balancing act that we spend a lot of time. This is where I say, like, where the guidelines are important, we use the guidelines, then we are, like my teams in general, we typically go back and look at it and like, look, let's add this feature in now. And I don't know what I wouldn't say I know the exact key pain points, it's really trying to figure out that balance of optimizing the user experience. You're not crushing the phone. I can allow our professional staff and agents out in the workforce to be able to do their jobs for an 8-hour day without having to plug in their phones every 30 minutes or an hour or whatever it is. And, and still getting the stuff that still satisfies legal and security as well, too, because, at the end of the day, if something happens, we're the ones who are on the hook for making sure all that data is managed and captured at the end of the day. So this one's, I'm not going to lie, this one's probably our toughest one. It doesn't get any better when new phones come out or as evolution kind of evolves. It's really comes down to you and your legal team and your security team. Luckily for us, we have a very good relationship with our legal and security. So we tend to, I don't know what the right word is. We tend to balance these things together. Hey, look, we may be able to do it like this, but we can do it like this and still optimize the user experience at the end of the day. We still want people to be able to use their phones and any mobile device.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your response.
Mm-hmm.
Eugene or Monique, I don't want to skip over you if you guys have anything else to add here. Otherwise, I'll continue on my next question.
I'll jump in, Kirsten. I would say, along with what Peter indicated with the balances, with BYOD, you have to be more concerned about privacy. There's a lot of personal data on a user's device. And so, in implementing a new security feature or a new piece of software is great, but you also have to balance it with the privacy concerns. And part of the NIST part of what NIST has developed is a privacy framework. And they've also developed a privacy risk assessment methodology. So whenever you're implementing new features, you really should go through a privacy analysis to determine whether or not any data actions that you're committing to on a device are not problematic data actions creating harms for the individual. And so that's one of the things we do in the labs. We go through that privacy analysis and determine where those problematic data actions might occur and how we might mitigate them. As an example, you could implement a new piece of software that grabs a lot of browsing history from a BYOD deployment. That could cause problems and harms for an individual because you might be gathering more information than you need, one, and two, it might be very personal because a person might be researching a health condition, and now you're gathering that information into your centralized management system. And so you have to consider those types of problematic data actions, how you might mitigate them. So privacy is another one of those pain points for BYOD situations.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eugene. All right, so moving on to our next question, we'll circle back to some more audience questions later. So for our panelists, just kind of keep in mind if you want to respond to any of those. But let's see, Monique, maybe we could start with you on this next one, which is, how does NIST's framework distinguish between organization-provided mobile devices and BYOD scenarios? And are there any specific security considerations for each that our audience should kind of be aware of?
Absolutely. This is a great, follow-up to the question the audience had asked regarding, what are some of the seamless user experiences? And if you have a large organization, being able to deploy mobile security on each and every employee's device in a seamless manner is critical. That's where you need to pair mobile threat defense with something like an MDM where, together they can provide a zero-touch activation experience where the user doesn't have to click on certain, apps to install them, or, it could just be pushed onto the device and activated. But, where BYOD devices, these are owned, like we said, they're owned and operated by employees and they're deemed high risk. Users are the admins, there's untrusted environments, there's a blend of work and personal information, but most importantly, there's a lot of unvetted applications that are installed, whereas, a corporate owned device, this is where you would have to secure these devices before you have to make sure they're secure before you give them to the employee. So I think, that's where NIST really tells a great story in distinguishing the both BYOD and organization provided devices.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Monique. Peter, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
So for us, we don't go on a BYOD model. We don't have that here in the Bureau. So, I mean, we took a more stringent approach and kind of, well, if and when we ever go towards a BYOD, which it's not in the roadmap anytime soon, at least, we have wholly owned enterprise devices by us at this point. We're not even in the COPE model at this point. So we took a more stringent approach, and then, we'll expand as necessary, because even going back to what Eugene mentioned, I mean, one of the microcosms as you kind of break down pillars within mobility is the privacy side of the house. And privacy obviously is a huge, foundational layer of what we do on these devices. Even if they are owned by us, we still have to take every precaution. I mean, I talk to my privacy lawyer at least multiple times a week. So, I mean, we know each other very, very, very well at this point. So as you go down the corporate, the corporate or BYOD, you've really got to get into the security layers, distinguishing those into the very detailed approach, and then getting into the privacy side of the house. And then from there, eventually you can relax. This is, again, our posture. Then you can relax policies, if that's the right word I would use, to even look at a COPE model at that point. But even at a COPE model, you're distinguishing probably layers where it's not really personal layer. You're probably distinguishing between an internal work and an external work, environment, to where you have specific applications and ecosystems that, you can sign into an app or log into an app at that point that's internal to the Bureau. But then we also do have Bureau employees who do go stay at hotels at Marriott and use Southwest and use stuff, but that's still going to be part of work related exercises as opposed to personal, because then you're, as Eugene mentioned, then you're going into like, now I know their medical history. If they're typing to whoever, their spouses or their anybody in their relationship, medical history and other things about them, then you're really getting into a slippery slope that I don't think we're ready for yet at this point. So.
For sure. And Eugene, would you like to add anything to this question?
Well, I think Monique and Peter bring up great points. The thing about COPE is that you can lock it down, right? It makes it a lot easier. And I will say, if you look at our practice guides, 1821 and 22, a lot of the details are very similar. The architectures are very similar. The back-end systems are very similar. But you do have additional concerns, as Peter mentioned, with privacy, because some of the systems allow, the wiping of data. If you should have an event, you can go in and wipe out data, and you have to be careful to do selective wiping, or else you wipe out personal data, which creates that problematic data action situation I talked about, where in this case, it's unwarranted restriction to personal data. Surveillance, there's a question about forensics, and your systems allow surveillance and data collection and then sharing of data between systems on the back end. And so you have to be careful about what you're doing. COPE, of course, makes it a little easier because you have policies in place. And as I said, you can lock it down. You can prevent malware from being loaded and those types of things. But you can do some of that stuff also with BYOD. You just have to be careful in your with your configurations and how you implement everything. But yeah, there are some similarities between the two situations.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm going to jump back over to our audience questions because we've had a lot come through, which is awesome. Renee, as far as the poll goes, I'm going to have our events team reach out to you if that's possible. I'm not totally sure. But Jeff Boyd writes in that the focus so far has been about mobile devices like smartphones, but he asks, what about portable storage devices like portable hard drives and flash drives? Some are FIPS certified and can be managed for additional security. So the question is for our panelists, are you looking at these as well as many other federal employees use them? Peter, go ahead.
So I'll start off, and I think we can get into the NIST side of the house as well too, on the FIPS and certifications and so on. So we definitely take a very, very stringent approach on any whatever portable devices, flash drives, all the above. Even your mobile phones are somewhat technically considered something like that, because you can go plug them in at the same time. The thing is, the differentiation between what we're discussing here and going down that avenue is the fact that there's a lot of physical security involved here as well too. So we have whole teams that literally look at the storage devices, making sure everything's done the right way, and making sure physical security is also involved too. As if you're getting into the actual devices as well too, there are standards around securing those devices and everything. You're always going to have the element of people walking out, regardless of what it is. Again, that's the reason we even have the physical security, have background checks, polygraphs, so on and so forth. I mean, even with the storage drive, there's nothing stopping someone from unplugging an entire hard drive, the whole computer, and walking out with the whole computer, regardless of whether it's a flash drive, hard drives, whatever it may be. At a certain onus, you have to put it over to the actual employee at that point. So that's why I said, to me, like, mobility is one lane, and then this one kind of is over here, even though they slightly blend into each other's role. Like, in our case, there's a whole other division that looks at these things and helps us monitor these things and manage it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then Monique or Eugene, for that question, or just any of the audience questions that you see, if you want to address any of those, we can open up the floor to that.
I haven't personally worked with external devices. That's the ones that are mentioned, hard drives, flash drives. I haven't worked with anything like that since my time at MITRE. I know in other organizations, it's based on policies and procedures, and a lot of times you have to, in order to use that, you have to go through a workstation and get them scanned in order to use them. Yep. Sometimes they say don't bring them in at all. It depends on the classification of the area. So it just depends. To give you a good lawyerly answer, it depends on the circumstances. There may be some standards at NIST. I'm not aware of them. And if I can, going into the next question about CUI and ITAR, I can tell you that in a previous life, I worked on ITAR related information, and it was an absolute no-no to take ITAR to another country. Anything that's export controlled, even if you're just viewing it, remote viewing was also not allowed, even for centralized servers that are in the United States. For CUI, I think it could be a little different. Don't hold me to that. But for CUI, I think it depends on where the processing occurs. So if you're just viewing it, then it may be possible, because where the data is actually controlled has to be CUI classified, and then you can view it. But again, don't hold me to that. I'm not an expert in CUI at this point.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for taking that one. I'm about to call for our next poll question, but maybe real quick, Mark Shabandi wrote in. Monique, maybe you can respond to this one. He just wants to know about some best practices to reduce risk and protect the mobile devices. If you could speak to that a little bit for Mark, please.
Absolutely. So reducing risk and protecting mobile devices. This is where you need to really think about your mobile ecosystem from an end user's perspective. Like for me, when I'm writing content or I'm thinking about ways to answer questions, I'm putting myself in the in the same seat as a user. Like, what's going to happen with my privacy? What's going to happen if I install this application? What type of data is it collecting? Is this data going to be associated with my personal identification? In addition to that, protecting your device from phishing attacks. It's harder to detect phishing attempts on a smaller device because the screen is smaller. So those are some things to take into account, but really thinking about vulnerability and risk management as a whole when it comes to protecting devices. So having a solution that sits on device, like a mobile threat defense solution, paired with an NDM, in addition to application vetting, those are all great ways to reduce risk and increase visibility throughout, the security teams, because that information that's ingested from devices such as threat data, that can be really utilized for security teams to improve threat hunting, to see different trends that may be happening, and to, stop risky activity before it becomes a complete outbreak.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Monique. Like I said before, I'm going to call for poll question number 2. If we could get that up on the screen, please. And this one is, how has your organization enforced app bans? So please respond to that. And on that similar topic, let's see here. Eugene, maybe you can kick us off here, but I want to ask, what role does NIST see for mobile threat defense solutions?
Yeah, before I answer that, though, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump back to the previous question about best practices. And Monique made great points. And what I think she's, the broad category that she's discussing is risk management. And so for any BYOD deployment, you have to really assess where you are currently. It's not just a matter of going with certain technologies or systems or processes. Even you have to determine where you are, where you're beginning through an assessment, and you really need to determine what your use cases are. That'll drive your requirements. And I have an engineering background, so I'm big on requirements. You determine what your requirements are, and then you can decide what you really need for that particular use case to satisfy your mission objectives. So that's something to keep in mind with regard to best practices. Now, you mentioned mobile threat defense and how does NIST view mobile threat defense? And I can tell you that I keep harping back to this, but it's really the big points. 1821 and 1822 COPE and BYOD deployments both use mobile threat defense within the labs, and within those guides, the mobile threat defense systems are mapped back over to the NIST framework, the CSF framework, to identify how they're helping to increase an organization's cyber maturity. So they're important. If you do a search on NIST and mobile threat defense, you get a landing page, but it'll link back over to 1821 and 22 as ways in which they deployed those systems. And the reason they're beneficial is because they provide device threat posture based on activity, risk, security. It looks at the device for insecure configurations. It looks at applications for threat detection. It looks at network activity. So it can alert to things like unencrypted traffic over insecure Wi-Fi. So it provides these, it looks for this activity, and it provides alerts to administrators and to users so you can take action, to prevent harm before it occurs. And as I mentioned earlier, and Monique probably mentioned it, it integrates with EMM solutions, Enterprise Mobility Manager solutions. So you can flag policies and things that are in violation, and blocking of malicious apps and those types of things. And it can even integrate with intelligence services to provide better awareness. It integrates with, and a shameless plug, it integrates with MITRE ATARC framework, and also with things like virus total and different things, so you can increase your awareness. So they're a big deal in BYOD deployments, and NIST has highlighted MTD in their different practice guides.
Mhm. And Eugene, also while I've got you on the topic, an audience member wrote in wanting to know, is there a difference, or does 1821, 22, and 24, do they intersect or overlap with 853 controls? Is that something you can answer for us?
Yeah, they do. It's a good question. And that's always, something that comes up, as we do these things, we create these practice guides and we come out with new frameworks and different things. How do they relate back to some of the other things that have been done, like 853? 800, what we do within the practice guides is we take the system that we're using, like MTD, in this case, Imperium in 1822, and we demonstrate how it maps over to the CSF. So we'll identify very specific functions and categories and subcategories that are implicated with that system, or that are mitigated or helped with that system. And then one of the other things we do in those practice guides is we provide the cross-reference to 853, as well as things like ISO 27K and some of the other things. So everything's cross-referenced over. So there is overlap with 853, and we look at those things within the guides to show you how they overlap. I will say also that NIST has an online informative reference, and that's what we call them within our practice guides, informative references. So as you're looking at the CSF, you can understand more about that specific function or category by looking at these online informative references. They're referred to as OLIR. You might hear that term from time to time, OLIR. So you can go and find those cross references, but they do intersect and overlap to a large extent. And now with 853, you have with CSF 2.0 and 853 version 5, there are some privacy controls interspersed within the overall framework, and they overlap with the privacy framework. And so we also provide those cross references with the privacy framework.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So go ahead, Peter, were you about to say something?
You're no, so that's a good explanation though.
Yes, absolutely. Peter, so circling back to my questions that I had too, I want to hear from you on, according to NIST, what is the benefit of MTD, or just speaking to your own experience, if you will?
So the MTD portion of it, it's a huge benefit. Whenever you're looking at the front end of a device, I mean, at a certain point you're layering things as you go, basically from infrastructure out. If you look at it from a bottom-up approach, once you get to the MTD side of the house, you're starting to get to the point to where you're helping the user take away things that they would more traditionally go after. When you're going after, say, connecting to a Wi-Fi at Starbucks or something like that, to where you can eventually shut things like that off, or whatever that front end piece is. You're almost giving yourself, as a user, you're giving your users the ability to flag themselves before they even know that they're about to do it. So, to explain it simplistically, I mean, you're getting into that user interactive portion, which is phenomenal, because again, as we mentioned at the very beginning of this, the majority of your infiltrations or your threat vectors are usually at the front where the users are at. So the more you can help throw up red flags, or at least make them challenge something in their brain to where, like, maybe I should or shouldn't be doing this, you're starting to get into those things. And even alerting us, in the back end side of the house, the agencies, you're alerting these organizations, hey, this, someone's phone, even if maybe you accidentally clicked on something, that's perfectly fine. Just let us know that, it alerted us, hey, someone hit on something or accidentally clicked this link, even if it was by accident. Cool, let's go out and try to mitigate this risk now, as opposed to letting it linger and eventually infiltrating deeper into your organization.
Oh, absolutely. And Monique, do you have anything you'd like to add here?
Absolutely. with MTD, there are tremendous benefits. One of the primary benefits we say is increased visibility, vulnerability assessment, and most importantly, proactive protection. These are all key benefits that security teams can, take advantage of when utilizing an MTD. But, with a vulnerability assessment, assessing improper configurations, device debugging, like, is this enabled? And are you able to detect known vulnerabilities in apps and mobile OSs? Like, those are all benefits that organizations can gain from MTD.
Absolutely. And while I've got you here too, can you help our audience understand how NIST defines app vetting and why that is important to mobile security and how MTD can improve app vetting?
Absolutely. With mobile app vetting, NIST really defines mobile app vetting. If you can't control what your employees or end users are installing on the device, mobile app vetting can detect software configuration flaws. As a day-to-day user, how do we know which data is being shared, which data is being sent to another country? When it comes to application vetting during deployment, it's important to vet applications. If you're creating applications, you need to make sure that these applications are secured during the development lifecycle and post deployment as well. So it takes a twofold approach when explaining application vetting, which I really like because, from a mobile threat defense perspective, we see it from an end user installing an application or an organization vetting an app before it's being installed. Is this application safe to use? But what I really liked about, the way NIST brought this to light as well is that, when you're creating these applications, that's something you need to be cognizant about as well.
Thank you. And Peter or Eugene, do you have anything else you'd like to add to any of the questions we've covered so far? Eugene, I saw you just came off mute. You want to add something?
I did. Two things with regard to a lot of the questions that have been asked. There's one other thing that NIST and MITRE provides, and that is the mobile threat catalog. And that's a repository essentially for threats, a description, and mitigating factors, things that you can do to mitigate the risk. So I would urge everybody to go up and look at the mobile threat catalog. It's specifically related to mobile deployments. I think it can be incredibly helpful, and it's updated on an ongoing basis. It's kind of like a working repository as new things come up. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. But when it comes to app vetting, I'm going to give you a very technical description from NIST and another number. Apologize, but it's NIST 800-163. It's a standard for or a description of app vetting, and I'm going to read this because it's very technical. This description. App vetting, according to NIST, is a software assurance process that ensures a level of confidence that software is free from vulnerabilities, either intentionally designed into the software or accidentally inserted at any time during its life cycle, and that the software functions in the intended manner. So that's a lot to say. That what they look at are, for instance, they look at the National Information of Assurance Partnerships on NIAP. They have 20 functional requirements and they have 4 assurance requirements that they look at. And the functional requirements are things like vendor reputation and cryptography that's used, installation and update integrity. Do they protect data? How are their third-party libraries? What do they use, and are they verified? And so this document describes all of that. But software assurance is overall, it's a process, and that's where mobile threat defense and some of these other systems can come into play, because it kind of takes care of all that in the background by going into intelligence repositories to determine whether an app is vulnerable or whether it provides a threat or not.
Thank you. And Peter, do you have anything else to add before we get into our round of key takeaways from the discussion?
No, I think I'm good. They covered it pretty well. Monique and Eugene did a good job of covering that one.
All right, excellent. Well, then I'd like to call for our third and final poll question here up on the screen. What are your enterprise's top 3 security concerns related to mobile endpoints? And with that, we've only got about 5 minutes left, but I want to hear from each of you just on what your key takeaway from this discussion has been. I know we covered a lot, but this is your chance to think about what you want to part our audience with today. Peter, let's start with you first on this.
Yeah, so I think the kind of the takeaways from this is it's a balance. This is a balancing act as well too. So I know we probably inundated all the attendees on this as well with a lot of NIST publications and a lot of information as well too. And I'll tell you from our experience, I mean, this is not a perfect science. When you really break it down and you're the one responsible for these things, you got to balance these things, and because your teams are only so big, most likely. So you got to fight for budget, you got to fight for all these things. So to get an MDM, to get an app vetting program, getting all the policies and around it, so you got to have all the people. I mean, it costs a lot of money, and it takes a lot of effort and someone managing each of these efforts too. It's taken us years and years to get, to where we are. But at the same time, like I do encourage people to start looking at the NIST stuff if they haven't, as well as the NIAP stuff that Eugene again mentioned as well too, as you get into the device side of the house and for any device, and trying to figure out what that balance is and figure out an approach to go after it incrementally. If app vetting is your number one, of importance, and that's what your organization's after, I mean, start there and start incrementally go after it. If not, go with an MDM and start managing your devices from there and build out from there, and then figure out the funding as you try to go after each incremental software and people and so on and so forth. So, I mean, if people have questions, I mean, we're here to help and answer if we can. Not saying it's perfect, so.
Thank you so much. And let's hear from Eugene next.
Thanks, Kirsten. Thank you, and thank you, David, for inviting me to join the panel today. I would say, to summarize, you're really dealing in BYOD deployments. You're really dealing with risk management, and there are a lot of resources up on the NIST website, which MITRE helped to develop. And basically, they're guidelines. You should use the frameworks and use the practice guides to your benefit. You have to take the frameworks and make them relevant to your organization. You might start by doing a profile, determining what's important to you and what's maybe a lower importance, and then you can identify your gaps in your roadmap forward. They could be used to determine budget concerns. They could be used to identify your use cases and what you on the various things on which you need to focus. NIST also has done a better job of late of producing how-to guides and getting started guides. So I would recommend anybody to go up to the NIST site and explore everything that's available, because it's an evergreen process. It's not a one and done. You have to continually evaluate your risk because it's constantly changing. And I can assure you that the threat actors are changing their methods all the time. So you always have to maintain an evergreen process. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thank you. And Monique, we will end with you.
Of course. Thanks for having me today. I had a really great conversation with 2 gentlemen. And earlier, Eugene said it very well, understanding where you are at in your security journey and what are the use cases. But in addition to that, really taking a look at the privacy perspective. Are you maintaining the integrity of the end user's privacy? Does a solution, reduce friction? Because you want something that's going to be easy, simple, fast to deploy. And also, take a look at the table in the NIST guidelines, the threat mitigation and countermeasures. This is a great place to start. If you take a look at, the threats you're looking to mitigate, take a look at those and see what countermeasures you either already have or can look at, and take a look at your budget.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. This has been such a great discussion. And of course, I will need to thank our partners at Zimperium again for making today possible. If you are an audience member and you'd like to receive your CPE credit, be sure to answer this 4th poll so we know whether to send it to you or not. And everyone at home, thank you all for joining us so much and sending in your questions. We had a lot of audience questions come through. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of them, but we do hope that you will join us for the next one, which is on October 17th, and it is part of our Quantum Speaker series. So if you enjoyed this content, I'm sure you'll enjoy that one. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. See you at the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.